A career criminal named Neil McCauley expertly executes scores around Los Angeles, always alert and ready to walk away from anything or anyone that could send him back to prison. On the other side of the city is a brilliant detective, Lieutenant Vincent Hanna, who's consumed by his need to bring justice to helpless victims and is willing to sacrifice everything to stop the crime waves terrorizing the city. As their lives begin to reflect one another, they enter an intense game of wits, each hoping to outsmart the other. In Los Angeles, a professional thief named Neil McCauley, who prides himself on his meticulous work, plans the perfect heist with his crew, Chris Hurley's, Michael Chirito, and Danny Trejo, and prepares in advance. That night, Neil disguises himself as a paramedic and steals an ambulance right off a hospital's parking lot. Meanwhile, Chris travels out of state and buys some explosives. On the morning of the robbery, Michael picks up a new addition named Waingro and starts the drive. Soon the operation commences full on and the crew takes their position. Moments later, as planned, the crew crashes into an armored car carrying bearer bonds and forces it to roll over. The crew then secures the car and proceeds with their operation while monitoring the police radio and timing themselves. Then they blow through the heavily secured vehicle's door. As the crew throws the guards out of the vehicle, the leader, Neil, quickly jumps inside and starts sorting through documents. After a few minutes of searching that felt like forever, to the relief of the crew, Neil locates the bearer bonds and exits the vehicle.
You wanna fuck with me?
As the crew proceeds to run to their getaway ambulance, Waingro stays back and fatally shoots a guard for no apparent reason. Unfortunately, this error in judgment forces the rest to shoot the remaining guards. Once in the ambulance, the crew, who are infuriated by the unnecessary bloodshed, scolds Waingro for his callousness. After driving a few miles, the crew abandons the ambulance, burns it along with other incriminatory materials, and flees the area. Later, Neil meets with his fence, Nate, who appraises the bearer bonds to be worth $1.6 million. Upon further discussion, Nate convinces Neil to sell the bonds back to their original owner, money launderer Roger Van Zant, and the duo makes a plan to contact him. Meanwhile, a dedicated LAPD detective named Lieutenant Vincent Hanna arrives on the crime scene with Sergeant Bob Drucker and the rest of the team, and after examining the crime scene, learns that the crew is highly proficient and organized. Hence, he orders his best men to gather as much evidence as they can and assigns reconnaissance tasks to the rest. Elsewhere, the still angry crew stops by a diner where Neil gives Waingro a piece of his mind. Then, while the rest of the crew stands guard, Neil lures Waingro to the parking lot and beats him up.
Hold it!
However, despite being blindsided by the attack, Waingro uses a moment of distraction and escapes Neil's wrath. Despite the crew's hour-long search, Waingro is nowhere to be found. That night, after paying off some of his gambling debts, Chris gives his wife Charlene his take from the robbery, but the couple gets into a heated argument as Charlene accuses her husband of gambling their future away.
Don't you think about it?
Elsewhere, Vincent gets home late and quickly checks on his stepdaughter Lauren, who struggles to maintain a good relationship with her birth father. However, soon after, Vincent gets into a fight with his third wife, Justine, who accuses him of prioritizing his work over her. Meanwhile, Neil meets a graphic designer named Edie, has dinner with her, and spends time getting to know her. One morning, Vincent and Bobby meet a local informant and demand to know what he knows about the robbery. After some threats, the informant agrees to meet them with his friend Richard, who has information about what goes on in the streets later that night.
He gonna meet you, man, I swear, tonight.
He's not here, is he?
On the other side of town, with the guidance of Nate, Neil meets with an outlaw named Kelso, who tips him off to a 12.1 million score at a bank and buys the blueprint and related schematics without hesitation. Then, after comforting a heartbroken Chris, who's terrified of losing his wife, Neil follows Charlene to a motel and figures out that she's having an affair with a man named Alan Marciano. He then confronts her, and after assuring her that Chris will change for the better, convinces her to give her marriage one last chance.
You will give him the chance.
Elsewhere, Vincent gets a break as Richard names Michael as one of the robbers, quickly informs his men, and after finding out that Michael has a long rap sheet, orders a 24/7 surveillance, including wiretaps on him. The next day, Neil meets with one of Roger's men, who follows Neil's orders and hands him the payment for the bonds. However, soon a man discreetly sneaks up on Neil and tries to assassinate him. Luckily, Neil had anticipated an ambush and came prepared with his hidden men monitoring the handoff. Neil quickly reacts and catches the assassin by surprise. All hell breaks loose as Chris shoots at the men from a distance while Neil charges towards the assassin. Neil then fatally shoots and runs over the assassin. Then, as the surviving assailant tries to flee, Michael kills him. Angered by the ordeal, Neil sends Roger a death threat. A few days later, Waingro visits a prostitute and after spending a few hours with her, brutally attacks and kills her.
Where you been?
Later that night, the girl's body is discovered and Vincent is called to the scene. There, as the lieutenant studies the evidence, he learns that the MO matches a few other unsolved cases and realizes that there is a serial killer roaming the streets.
Get off me! Get off of me!
Vincent then takes time to comfort the grieving mother before leaving.
Where's my baby?
After days of surveillance, the police learn that the crew is planning to rob a local precious metal depository. On the night of the robbery, Vincent and his men hide in the adjacent parking lot and quietly observe as the crew breaks into the depository. Inside the depository, the operation gets into full swing as each of the crew members expertly carries out their responsibilities. Unfortunately, a policeman negligently makes a ruckus and breaks the dead silence of the night. As the detectives hold their breath, vainly hoping no one heard the sound, Neil halts the operation and rushes his men out. Moments later, the detectives helplessly watch as Neil and his crew leave the depository empty-handed. Hoping to arrest them for more than a breaking and entering misdemeanor, Vincent lets the criminals walk away.
I have tactical command that supersedes your rank. They will walk away, and you will let them.
Having learned that they are on the LAPD's radar, Neil gathers his men to warn them to be cautious, as they are always being watched. Then he asks each of them to individually decide whether they want to throw in the towel and lie low, or do one last bank heist. To his surprise, despite the heat from the police, they each decide to execute Kelso's tip. A few days later, Vincent approaches Alan and forces him to start spying on Chris through Charlene.
People here, okay?
Las Vegas PD takes you into custody.
Neil then uses his wit to lure Vincent and his men into a public place so that he can identify and learn about his enemy.
Okay.
One night, Vincent stops Neil on the freeway and invites him to coffee. There, Neil and Vincent openly discuss their respective jobs, their dedication, and come to a mutual respect. Despite this, each of them confesses that they will not hesitate to kill the other if necessary.
I'm sitting at this big banquet table, and all the victims of all the murders I ever worked are sitting at this table, and they're staring at me.
This conversation feels so authentic as Neil McCauley's character is based on a real criminal who lived by the same cautious discipline. And when Al Pacino and Robert De Niro finally sit across from each other, it's the first time the two actors who define crime cinema actually share the screen. Later, the crew manages to find and remove all the police wires, heads to the target bank, and disables the security system. Meanwhile, Waingro approaches Roger and offers him his services in scheming against Neil and the crew. The morning of the robbery, as Neil, Chris, and Michael wait for Danny, he calls to inform them that he couldn't shake off the police surveillance and opts out of the operation at the very last minute. This forces Neil to approach his old associate, Donald Breeden, and recruit him as their getaway driver. Then the crew arrives at the bank, casually walks in, disarms the security officers, and starts the operation.
Down! Down! Get on your knees!
Neil orders the civilians to follow their orders and promises not to hurt anyone,
Anybody got heart trouble, go ahead and lean against the wall.
while the rest empty the vault. Meanwhile, at the police station, one of Roger's men, named Hugh Benny, tips the police off about Neil's bank robbery plans, and the police rush there. Upon arrival, Vincent sees the crew leaving the bank, orders his men to lie low and wait to apprehend them once they are all in the getaway car. However, all hell breaks loose a few minutes later when Chris spots the heavily armed detectives and starts shooting at them. After a brief shootout, the crew starts driving away, while Vincent and the rest of the officers continue chasing and shooting at them. Then Donald is fatally shot, which forces the crew to leave the car. After an intense shootout in which multiple officers are killed, Chris is shot. Despite taking heavy fire, Neil takes a moment to rescue Chris and drives off with him. Meanwhile, Michael, who's stranded at the bank, takes a young girl hostage and attempts to escape, but is shot and killed by Vincent. Neil takes Chris to a doctor, arranges for Nate to pick him up, and leaves to confront Danny, whom he suspects is the one who sold them out. At Danny's place, Neil finds Mrs. Trejo dead and Danny fatally shot. In his dying breath, Danny confesses that Waingro and Roger had coerced him to sell the crew out and apologizes. Neil then kills Danny to put him out of his misery.
The guy lives on Hillside Terrace in Sino.
Meanwhile, Vincent ambushes Hugh at his house and learns of the connection between Waingro and Neil.
Who?
Elsewhere, Neil breaks into Roger's place and kills him. Then Vincent devises a plan to lure Neil out to the hotel where Waingro is hiding and orders his men to stay alert. Elsewhere, Neil calms down Edie, who finds out about his criminal activity, convinces her to flee New Zealand with him, and visits Nate, who arranges for a new escape plan on a private jet, scheduled to arrive at the airport later that night. Elsewhere, Sergeant Bobby takes Charlene to a safe house and convinces her to lure Chris there. However, once Chris arrives, Charlene subtly gives him a warning gesture and helps him escape capture.
Yeah. You know any place to rent around here?
Meanwhile, Vincent goes to his hotel room to spend the night as he had moved out of his house due to his pending divorce from Justine, and is utterly shocked to find Lauren, who has attempted suicide, bleeding in the bathtub, and rushes her to the emergency room. Meanwhile, as Neil and Edie drive to the airport, Nate informs Neil of Waingro's location. Driven by grief of losing his friends, Neil abandons his usual caution and heads to the hotel to seek revenge. There, he poses as the hotel security, pulls a fire alarm as a distraction, enters Waingro's room, and kills him. Once the police notice Neil's arrival, they swarm the hotel, but Neil manages to exit the hotel using the fire chaos. However, as he heads to his car, where Edie is waiting, Neil sees Vincent marching towards the car, decides to leave his girlfriend behind, and flees the area, with Vincent following closely behind. After a lengthy chase, the duo ends up in the airport, where the cat and mouse game continues. After an intense chase, Vincent shoots Neil multiple times. As Neil bleeds out, Vincent holds his hand and comforts him. And with that, the story ends. Please like and subscribe to our channel for more of the best film recaps.